There is simple progress and there is more complex progress. But even any kind of progress is not based upon mere opposition, not simple opposition. If we jump into reality just at any arbitrary point, which I'm about to, a something, a system, a relationship, let's call it M or L. Then in some way, not just two-dimensionally and not just going up or in any two-dimension, if this thing, whatever L is going to survive in some way, then this must happen. Now there are several possibilities, but I'm going to point out the easy one. I'm going to point out the one that everyone recognizes, the one to which human intelligence is accustomed without any particular analyzation thereof. And it would normally be referred to, let's say it's going to be apparently pushing against this. And the most common reference would be that this is an anti-L, and it's pushing against it. But then it can move into other areas, take on a different. And this is just one of several that I could point out even after having set up this 2- and 3-dimensional diagram. Then let's say that one begins to sort of lay across these. And it could be an anti-L, but let's say that it seems to be moving into a slightly expanded or different area. And now this one, let's call is M. And then on top of that, we could have we could have the great now from any view, from ordinary intelligence of all kinds, educated, sophisticated, rural, bucolic, this would represent some kind of progress. It would definitely be recognized as some sort of change. If it gets into great generational expansions, it sometimes can be looked at as being, from the individual view, from a kind of negative change, that things are getting too fast, things are getting too complicated. And you see that, of course, represented in ordinary intelligence, especially when people get past menopause. This, systems, relationships, criticisms, observations, it's true with individuals, it's true with institutions, it's true with tribes, with nations. And it all has to do now, in this sense, it all is tied to and has to do with talk. And it's tied directly to what appears to be the opposition, you would think ordinarily, between the simple and the complex, the powerful and the weak. Notice this, if we consider the anti-M to be the most flamboyant. I do it the biggest, it's the most complex, still based upon this. If we pulled out, I started out with just a block here. If we pull that out, this thing would collapse in some way. It would not be the structure it is now. This, fine-looking, rococo, whatever the hell it is, would in some way be deflated. It would collapse, it would be injured. So the very things that started out, that now, indirectly, this anti-M is, of course, anti-L, because it's all tied together. Anything that seems to be criticism, that which seems to be even useless criticism, or that which seems to be different theories of criticism, in the literature, for instance. There are all sorts of schools whose names I don't even keep up with. of going back and revising literature, going back and revisiting literature, looking at literature historically from hundreds of years away, then trying to look at literature, say it was written in the 1700s, try to look at it with 1700 intelligence. It is all a piece of progress. And it is not that one thing is better than the other. It is not now that L was wrong, that L was too simple. It's not that. Do you see that from one view, one quite correct view, it is irrelevant if you're going to look at this whole structure to say, well, L has now been discounted. The theory of L in literature, politics, religion, philosophy, human relationships, that old idea of L and that kind of thing that came out of the Middle Ages, and just as Europe was pulling itself out of the collapse of Rome and the Visigoths and all of them went back home because they didn't have a home, that all those ideas are now discredited. You're wrong. I mean, they can be discredited, but it's not because they were discredited. If it is now everyone's opinion, all the literary, all the intelligentsia, if their opinion is that blank theory of politics is completely discredited with any intelligent person, let's say that's true. The thing that they're discrediting, some old political idea, let's call it L, to say it's discredited really means nothing. But the way intelligence takes it is, well, it has ceased to exist. We now know better, and so never mind that I have put it aside. It is still part of the structure. I have, it's of no real importance, but it seems in a way a shame that some of the people have begun to, of late, find themselves distracted, disoriented from feeling good, from feeling the lack of biting pressure and resistance in this, at least temporarily. But as you begin to feel good, you got to face the possibility of starting to do some good. And just because it, at least for the time being, begins to feel a little soft, the second act is always a bit softer than the first act. Everywhere. The first act is always somewhat grab them by the throat and get the audience's attention. But the second act is always a bit, I'm just going to call it softer. From a variation of one that was read of one of the old lines night before last, I'm going to, I think, give some of you here, and perhaps out of town at the other groups, the opportunity to feel even better. Some of you should be prepared for a more subtle good news series of little maps. A variation of one that I let hang around for a long time from night before last from that mass reading. I had Kyrut say that a God, with a little g, that a God that was truly important, omnipotent, would not even have to exist. See, it even gets a little chuckle now. Wait a minute. Some of you should find this so interesting and amusing that in a few minutes you're not even going to be able to laugh about it. The more powerful a thing is, the closer it lies to non-existence. And a thing covers all things. Relationships, ideas, systems, nouns, verbs. The more powerful, the more complex it is, the closer it comes. The closer it comes to the horizon of almost not existing. In the three-dimensional, intellectual, and therefore total life of man, it is the weaker and hence the more simple. But it is the weaker relationships and things that must be continually noted, flaunted, and reestablished, while those that are more powerful and are more complex continue to run right up to the edge of near invisibility. Some of you, I'll give you another promise if not a threat, in a few more minutes should hear night after night and all sorts of things I've talked about in other ways and called other things tied up in this. Some of you should have already heard it. That the more powerful, the more important something is, the closer it comes, literally, to non-existence. In the three-dimensional affairs of life progressing, the life of man, the weaker, the more simplistic something is, the more it must be noted. If any of you are waiting for the other word to drop, the more it must be talked about. Consider you're surrounded by examples. But also pull, not for my sake, and not for me to cover myself by saying that this is not criticism again for the billionth time, but watch it yourself, because this is not social criticism, and it is not really psychological observations, although I'm taking that which seems to have to do with human nature, but this don't really have to do with human nature. Some of you must know that by now. It all applies, and some of it can apparently be used as tricks, and some of it has apparently helped you, but this is not some kind of course in the study of human nature. It's not an attempt to affect human nature. So try and keep that in mind for a second. The examples. How about the great, because this is all having to do with chemical, molecular activity within the body of life itself, this living thing, life. Consider the great observable manifestations, for instance, of bumper stickers. But get past any idea that people do it to show off or that some kind of social phenomenon that will pass. I'm just picking that out to get you started. I love our heart, my children. I love my family. I love my hobby. Some say, I would rather be boating. I would rather be flying. I love my pet. What is going on? What is it that people continually tell each other how much they love each other? Parents telling children. Parents making children tell them. You're going to miss it all like everybody else. You won't be in any better position. You'll be down here somewhere with L, or perhaps pushing against it. If you don't realize this has to do with the molecular, the chemical health of life, it just seems to have something to do with sociological or psychological activities of men. The weaker the relationship or system, and if I had time, or I'll just tell you, all systems are relationships, no matter what they are. It's a relationship to a man, to somebody, or it wouldn't be a system. It wouldn't be an institution. It would not exist were it not in some kind of relationship to somebody. If it was just one person, the one person who has made up something, who dreams that he sees a spirit that's a combination of Voltaire and Edgar Allan Poe. There is a relationship between the person who invented that, the person who dreams it, and the thing, so it is now a system. It's going to be a, may I point out to you, a very weak, a very simplistic system if it goes no further than him and what he made up and what he dreamed. But all of the rest of it, anything that can apparently be a system, anything that apparently has to do with the unique life of man, is a relationship. all of the weaker, all of the more simplistic relationships must be continually noted. People must talk about it. It's not that something is wrong. Contrary. And it's not that there is any way to attack or criticize to say, well, people talk too much. That, all right, if a man and woman loved each other, they wouldn't be going around to parties all the time, driving the rest of us crazy, always saying, oh, I love my little honey bun. And she says, oh, I love my big old bear here, big old bear Billy. You know, those folks drive us crazy. I love to see people enjoy each other's company. Why do they have to keep talking about it? It's a weak relationship. It is fairly unimportant. Why do people, some individuals are driven to proselytization about their religion? Why? Because their relationship to it is very weak, very simplistic. There is a kind of, as always, fifth dimensional symmetrical beauty to this, because they are the most vociferous. Even at the ordinary level, it has been noted in the times past by parts of life's body at a fairly mundane level that there is something particularly odious about people who talk too much about their interests, or about their religion, for instance. It's bad enough that they may get on your nerves that they keep saying, hey, you should convert and be an Episcopalian or a Catholic. You know, that's bad enough they keep doing it. But you know, sometimes, Siegfried talks about that so much and how much fun it is. Under a different circumstance, you almost want to paraphrase or quote Shakespeare under a different guise and say, he almost talketh too much. You know, if it's so great, there's no rational explanation for it to ordinary intelligence, but it's like, well, if it's so great, won't you shut up? Or why do you have to keep talking about it if it's all that great? If it's all that great, it looks like you just be smug about it and just happy. Of course, that has no great lasting effect out in the city life, but it is a chemical, physical fact that the weaker the relationship is, the more it must be noted, the more talking about it. That is, the movement of molecules, the movement of energy through speech, and speech internally to one person, but speech even amongst people, that the speech must be there to enrich it. There is proselytization not only of the religions, of nationalities, of people proclaiming how great it is to be, by God, a Bulgarian. And how wonderful it is. Those who say that, there is no objective way to judge how great it is to be a Bulgarian. But I am telling you that the weaker the relationship is, and you don't, of course, have to have any Bulgarian lineage in you to see this, you can feel in your own nervous system. That which you are continually compelled to note, to bring forth in your speech or your thoughts, some of you, this should turn you loose, is a very weak relationship. It could be with your mother, that you continually talk about how much your family life has meant to you, how much it meant to you in the past, how much you miss it now that you've moved from your homeland or from your place of birth. Any relationship that you are compelled to continually note, whether it just be here, which is almost impossible for ordinary people unless they're hermits, to note it here and then not note it here. The relationship is weak. It is fairly unimportant, but your connection to it is weak. That's why you are driven to talk about it. It comes out, there are even other ways. I'll bet every damn one of you have been through this, is rather copious verbal notations of some new doubtful possession. You went ahead and you sprang for the big bucks or sprang for the big debt and bought this car, and what's the first thing you do, you've been dreaming about, is you drive it to almost everybody you know and look at the car, look at the car, look at the car, and you walk around and you show them everything. It's fine, there's nothing wrong with having a car if you That's your secondary hobby. But your relationship to it is weak. And it must be noted. It must be talked about. People do it, and it doesn't have to be as expensive as a car. But it's just something that, as far as you're concerned, it was a doubtful acquisition. Is this dress really worth $200? I wish somebody was here. I wish one of my girlfriends was here, my mother, my sister. But if they're not, you go ahead and get it. And if they still that doubt, you immediately stop by somebody. You see if your sister's home and you hold it up. Huh? Or a man buys a tool, an electric level. A free introductory price of only $179, and he immediately wants to show it everybody he knows and go, huh? And to tell you everything that they told you about it as fast as you can and keep repeating it. Now see, psychologically, somebody could note this also and say, well, it's a kind of whistling in the dark. It's people who believe that maybe they've been taken or they did spend too much for this and they want some kind of peer support. That's all fine. That doesn't explain anything. That kind of information is not new. It is not complex. Anybody should be able to say that. It is something else going on. The individual relationship with that person to that possession was weak. Now, weak means something. I started out, I took the springboard, remember that Kairos, the one-liner about a guide that was really important. The true worth, the true representation of the power of some God, the importance of some God would be that he was so important he didn't even have to exist. That's not just funny. Think about it religiously. Think about how people, not just proselytizing out on the sidewalk, but individually, internally, but then collectively within the group it shows up, but that people feel the need to get together. Those that are religious under different guises, they can be religious politically, but specifically religiously, they want to get together and go through rituals, and they continually repeat the name of God, not just the individual thing of monks or some people really tied to the religion of trying to individually do it with every breath, not all that thing, but to get together once a week, periodically, and they chant the name. They talk about the God. They continually tell each other, or if they don't do it individually, the ritual is telling the whole group, and by them being there, they are acquiescing, supporting the idea that it is great to be a Jew or a Presbyterian, to be here and to celebrate our Presbyterianness, our Jewishness, that's easier to say, our Catholicismness. They are continually noting it because their relationship to it is very weak and very unimportant, very simplistic. The continual notation of it is a form of enrichment. It is a form of helping this kind of structure grow by continually noting it. Now, this is not criticism. If there was indeed an opposite direction, it would be away from what I'm talking about thus far in the first part of, or the latter part of the sentence I started part of this with, by telling you that the more important something is, the closer it lies to non-existence. Assuming I'm going any further tonight, I'll go ahead and give you a hint. How about this kind of activity? How about the way most of you now, on a good day, think about it? Because on a good day, as far as this being some kind of system, or there being some kind of observable, notable relationship between you and this thing, you and me, but you and this thing, you almost, those of you who have not wasted your time and mine, you almost don't think about it anymore. Because you almost are to the realization that it doesn't do any good. What's there left to think about? There's nothing to think about, I wonder what it is, I wonder what it not is, I wonder where it came from, I wonder where it didn't come from, I wonder where it's going, I wonder how long it'll stay here. The good ones of you, the better ones, the more complex ones of you right now almost don't think about this anymore. Not in any sense that you did when you started, or not in the sense that any legitimate, sane person in the city, under ordinary conditions, would think about anything in which they were involved, whether it be their religion, some political organization, a bird-watching society. You have to note that you're part of it. You have to attend. You have to attend to certain rituals within it, if the rituals are just being there at meetings. You have to talk about it. You have to tell somebody, oh, I can't meet you tonight for bowling. I've got to go to the bird-watching society meeting. And you talk to yourself. Ooh, I can't see that show tonight on TV because I've got to go to the bird-watching society. You tell yourself. But how about to go do something and it almost doesn't exist? You're doing it, but it almost doesn't exist in the sense that I start out trying to talk to you tonight. That the kind of guides, and of course now forget guides, the kind of stuff, the kind of things, the kind of relationships that are truly important, that are powerful, forget gods now, just fill that in, that blank, relationships, activities that are truly important, that are more complex, literally rest near and approach non-existence. Do you realize anything that exists? All right, let's go back to the gods. A lot of you laughed, and I've used a slight variation of this before, but if you could see it all, a little more complex, and there was some kind of useful validity to the idea of extrinsic God, some figure, something outside this system. If it existed to the sense that we knew it, the creations, can you get just a fleeting glimpse that that's not much of a God? If the best he could do, the best he could create, that those creatures could perceive him, or her, or it, that wasn't much of an act he did. The act of creation was pretty small time. He was probably warming up. Or he was a pretty simple God, an unimportant God, a novice God. Because if he indeed went poof and made all that, and then within some length of time, some of the creatures went, hey, there's God. I saw him in a dream, or he talked to me. Or at least I hadn't seen him, but my intelligence tells me exactly what he is. And one guy describes it, and a whole bunch of them go, yeah, I was about to say the same thing. So that God exists, and they know it. The majority of them know it. It was not much of a God. A real God, a more complex God, a powerful God, would be so powerful that he wouldn't have to exist. Any information that is powerful enough doesn't have to exist. Anything the ordinary intelligence can know is knockoff. It's low rent. It's Kmart. It is simply not complex information. If it exists, it is weak. It's unimportant, and your relationship to it is weak. That's why there is no value on the information that is available. It has no particular value. People can argue over it. They can apparently change it from day to day, generation to generation, place to place. Look at that. Look at the L as being some kind of idea, some piece of information. If it exists, it's very weak. At least any of you think you're missing something. When I say right now, if it exists, that is whether your intelligence says it exists. And if your intelligence says, if you can perceive that this thing exists, it is not powerful, whatever it is. An idea, a criticism, a belief, a feeling, a relationship. If your intelligence tells you it exists, it is not the best available. It is the best that is available for ordinary people. But it would be a God of no particular importance. A God certainly of no power. Certainly not omnipotent. But he would not be important, or he wouldn't exist. If he exists, then everybody, all the serfs, the fiefs, nerds, Accountants, lawyers, everybody would recognize him. Everyone would admit that he, it, the idea, the information exists. The only reason that people have any interest in ideas, in talking about things, especially important things, is that their relationship to it is very weak. In the same way that people that must talk about individuals that must talk about continually their relationship to each other and how much we mean to each other and how much we love each other, it's weak. In the city, this is some sort of multidimensional blasphemy, because the ordinary intelligence should be left with then having to ask such questions. If there was somebody to answer them, they're saying, well, then all you're saying is if people act like they didn't like each other, they didn't talk about it, then that'd be a better relationship. But you can't fake it. You've got no example. There is no widespread, and even if there was, you couldn't see it from the ordinary view, but there is no example at the ordinary level of intelligence to see an alternative to this. At the city level, there seems to simply be the two choices as always. All right, if there are two people who have a relationship, a love relationship, then in some way they've got to express it. And one way is to talk about it. And the opposite of that would be that they don't have one. So there seems to be no alternative to say, well, a real relationship, if it was stronger, would almost be non-existent. To ordinary intelligence, that means nothing. You'd say, well, what you're saying is it's two people that have no relationship. Like two strangers or two people that went on a date maybe once, and then in the evening they went, well, you know, the chemistry ain't there. You know, I had a nice time, but I guess, you know, we struck out. No. But that's all ordinary intelligence can say, was it one of those two possibilities. Real relationships almost do not exist. That is, more important ones, more powerful ones, more complex ones. I guess I can point out the obvious. It should be the obvious. One obvious line of the extreme of this would be people's apparent relationship vis-a-vis they're talking about themselves. Why is it that people must talk about themselves? And eschew all the old ideas of egocentric behavior and subconscious desires to make yourself appear to be superior to your peers, or to overcompensate for your feelings of inferiority and childhood traumas. Never mind that. It's childish. It's ordinary intelligence. It's ordinary information. You can perceive it. It's got no power. It doesn't do anything for you. Now, because I say so, you've got enough time to see, you can mouth that and say, well, that's what that kind of thing is. People talk about themselves. Those who have a shaky self-image. And the shakier it is, the less secure the foundation, way down, especially in the subconscious, the more they must talk about themselves. You can say that. The whole city can say that. I can say it for humanity in general. But some of you can immediately face the fact that, all right, I say that, and my old intelligence, my ordinary intelligence takes that as being some kind of fact. Then the question is, so what? It's meaningless. It is a guide with no power. It's a God that might as well not exist because he got no power. Knowing that has not affected you at all. That's why that knowledge exists. But now let me tell you why people talk about themselves. It's because their relationship to what they think of as themselves is so weak. Not psychologically. It is so weak. It is so unimportant. It is so simplistic that it must be enriched by them talking about themselves. It is not a psychological flaw of some kind. And even people who seem to be rather taciturn will continue to talk about themselves internally. They think about themselves. Remember, extract the little g God from the idea that a truly important, a truly powerful God would be so powerful and important that he wouldn't have to exist. Put in you, your intellectual conception of you, In the higher end of the nervous system loop, your awareness that you exist is something separate from the other mass of molecular structures that pass for being humans, that you are in some way separate from them. Your relationship, everyone's at the ordinary level, is so weak. The relationship between you and you is so weak that it must be continually noted. Whereas if it was truly more important, if it was more powerful, it almost would not exist. It would be reaching that kind of horizon that it is almost non-existent. One little twist may help some of you. Let me turn this a little bit. In that it is not the opposites. The complex, in the way that is meant here, is not the opposite of simple. And that strong, powerful is not the opposite of weak. Such as me pointing out that it's weak relationships that make the relationship, and the participants have to continually note it, to hold it out, if not flaunt it. And it's like continually to reestablish it, which is a way of enriching it by talking about it. The opposite of that is not anything known to ordinary intelligence. They would just say, well, the opposite of it is that there'd be no relationship. Because that's the only, and I could say, if I was that foolish, to say, well, wait a minute, that's not true. The opposite would be that they could have that and not talk about it. And if ordinary intelligence tried its best, because life knows what it's doing, it's got people wired up, if it tried its best, it would go, say that again. That's all right. I'm telling you that people must talk about their relationship to themselves, to everything. Because, or the more they talk, but the reason that they do have to talk is because the relationship is a weak one. And the opposite of that is not, as you suggested, that there'd be a lack of relationship. Can't you see one possibility? The opposite of that could also be said, that you've got a relationship still between the person that we're using as an example. Their relationship exists, but that they do not talk about it. And the person would go, God, you know, I hear what you're saying, but it's not true. That's not the opposite. The opposite would be to have the relationship, but instead of talking about it, is don't talk about it. See if you can follow this for a second. We've got a prime example in contemporary affairs that the opposite is not the opposite. The question of abortion in this part of life's body, known as the United States, posed right up to the last few weeks, continuing to show that those that seem to get polled is down now almost to 50-50. That half the people, and we're to the point circa 1989, that it is reaching the point of street violence. That 50% of the people are violently opposed to abortion, and 50% support it. Support the idea that it's everybody's right to. Now these two camps, these two oppositions, an L and an anti-L, rather than seeing, or in addition to seeing, their opposite number as being their adversary, if you question them, that is, you question that part of life's system, and I put it to them just the right way, no great trickery involved, they would know just in a fleeting moment that there is even a more dangerous possibility than their adversary. And that would be to find people who have no opinion. That they're the most dangerous. But now listen quick. Within the confines of me verbally describing this, if this could happen in the city to ordinary people, a person, an ordinary person that indeed had no, or had a very, very weak relationship to the abortion question, would be the closest to the essence of it. But the rest of the people, the two armed opponents, the two violent opponents, would see such people, if they could be identified, But if they were polled and said, well, I don't really care. And no matter that one group said, wait a minute, and they gave them 2 or 3 minutes of their pep talk. The first one, well, another person gave them 2 or 3 minutes. The first said, I still, I really don't know. I just got no opinion either way. It doesn't even bother me. I just got to go. They would see that as being, in fact, more dangerous. They might even say that such people are more dangerous than our opponents across the street, as misled as they are. This is the most dangerous, is to have people on this planet, when there's a question of right and wrong, good and evil, to have people walking about that have no opinion. They're worse than those that have the wrong opinion. Now, that's nothing new. That didn't come about just through my example today of abortion. The cleverness of it, the efficiency of energy of life, the unseen way in which things grow, not through simple opposition, that those, if it could happen, and it had any meaning, well, ordinary intelligence, those who have almost no opinion about something are in a way closer to the essence of what the thing is, and yet life continually, through men, denounce and forbid people to get into this restricted area, because that's exactly what it amounts to. If the people or person I just described, surely some of you can see it by now, that I said could not happen. You would not have someone under ordinary conditions that would not have an opinion. I'm not going to go through this very much. You just either know that by now or don't. But if that did happen and they had some knowledge of what was going on, their relationship to the thing, to the question, to the problem, to the activity would be the more powerful, would be the more complex. And that's the very kinds of so-called opinions, let's call it opinion, that's the very thing that life makes others, the ones who are violently cut up into 2 camps, denounce it, that life has arranged things that it's just virtually impossible for this to happen. It is an unmarked, but it is indeed in the nervous system, a restricted area. If there was a sign up, which there's not, it would say something like, there is important things going on here, in this case, abortion. There's an important thing that's a part, if life would make such admissions to man, which it does, you just can't hear it, but it would say, I have not yet decided, I am indecisive as to this matter of abortion. Right now, it's yes and no. I don't want anybody wandering over here in this area where they don't know. Turn the tape over. What life is saying to itself through men, and then men hear each other say it, is that in these examples, let's stick with abortion for a second, all sorts of things, nuclear power, warfare in general, conflicting religions, you name it, it's there. It is saying that I have yet to fully decide, because if life had, we would not be discussing it. We would not be arguing over it. We would not be thinking about it. It would be a relationship that was so strong that it was almost non-existent. It's settled. It is that powerful. But when life is saying to itself through men that this is important and I have not decided it, then those 2 armed camps, the pros and the cons, that seem to have, that appear to have the strong, the inflexible, but strong opinion. They're over here, they're ready to go to jail. Provoked enough, they'll fight. The pros over here with their placards, their bullhorns, and the cons over here. These strong opinions, do you realize, from where I started to try to point to tonight, are the weakest possible links in the relationship between them and life. The stronger is someone's opinion at the ordinary level, the simpler, the less important, the weaker is their relationship to the essence of whatever it is. All right, the truth, which is meaningless, but of understanding it, of having in you information, the stronger your opinion is. But look what you're left with at the ordinary level. There is no real opposite to that, other than what I described. It does not naturally, organically exist in life. That is someone who understood what was going on and had no real opinion. They would be closer to a more complex area in life's nervous system. If there was in direct communication, one individual life would say to life, hey, you know, I kind of agree with you. Don't feel bad, big guy, that you're not sure what to do about this abortion question. You know, I'm just one guy, I'm not trying to show off. But if you can hear me, you know, I've looked at it, I'm pretty intelligent, and I'm about like you, I just don't know. And life would be impressed. But life is not impressed. Life marks that as a restricted area. Life makes the other two armed camps, the other two violent, the pros and the cons, who are a reflection of its indecision. It even makes them denounce, if such a person showed up that truly had an understanding of it and no opinion, the pros and the cons denounce that that is dangerous. It's better to be wrong than to be indecisive. It's better to have the incorrect opinion than to have no opinion about something this important, which is not, it's true enough in the city, but it's not true, do you see? It's not correct, because life does not have a firm opinion, or men would not be arguing over it. It would not be driving men to shout, yea, nay. Some of you should really consider, due to whatever we may be doing in Act 2, that this kind of activity, it's not important whether you understand it or not, or whether you see it right this second, but I'm just going ahead and tell you that this kind of activity, and I'm not necessarily referring to what's going on right here, and I'm not referring certainly that it's dependent upon yours truly, but this kind of activity, this kind of information that seeps out, is indeed so powerful and is so important to life that it continually moves, lingers around, approaches non-existence. That's how powerful, that's how important it is. And when it really begins to be a part of an individual, is what some of you have been suffering over, and some people have taken leaves of absence, and some people have even dropped by the wayside, especially in the last, if you notice, some weeks when I announced, without telling you how, that I was closing up Act 1. Some of you, I hate to see it happen in a way, are beginning to feel that you have lost some kind of relationship to this, that you're not sure what, but it seems to become even mushier than it was, or perhaps I'm not as pushy, or I don't seem to be as dangerous. Have I weakened? Is the whole thing weakened? Is the threat that seemed to have brought you here originally, whatever it was, is it seemed to have diminished? If you had the right kind of relationship to anything, but we're talking about this, the stronger the relationship is, the more important it is, the more complex it is, the more you are putting into it, the more you are taking out of it, the more you are an active volume trader in this exchange of energy, the less you have an ordinary conception of the thing even existing. It certainly has been quiet here this evening, has it not? This cannot be faked. This is not a natural occurrence in ordinary life, but let me put it to you this way. If it was down to a kind of real primary level, certain kind of genetics were just in balance that I can picture, and probably some of you can picture, that there was just almost an idyllic, nonverbal relationship between you and your progenitors, you and your family. If that kind of primary genetic need had been met, and life was indeed growing in a nice, complex way, not the end of the world, but through your line, which I will give you a hint, it is, or you wouldn't be here, you would never have any particular occasion to ever note your relationship with your mother or father. You certainly wouldn't have to tell somebody, boy, have I got a great dad. The need that you have to say that, whatever it is that much less, or that I can point out to you, is the importance, is the complexity of your actual relationship. It's not right or wrong, it's nothing you did, it's nothing he did. But can any of you hear me? If it was just any way you want to take the word, just take it to its fullest extreme, idyllic, archetypical, that you and your parents, or if indeed you met, as the Greeks believed, your true soulmate, your other half, and you looked across the field, across the shopping mall at him or her, and it was indeed the love. At first, it's the Romeo and Juliet. They can kill you, they can tear you apart, they can rip out your heart, but this is it. I may never amount to anything, and I can't defend her. I never even imagined she doesn't like anything I ever looked at in Playboy. That sort of thing, which is still the genetic part of life, the genetic code, coming into a nice, complex progress. Do you see? Some of you have had little pieces of this. This is not some kind of theory. I'm just telling you something that's never been talked about in life's body. Life just barely talked to me about it, if you don't know the truth. You wouldn't have any particular occasion to ever have to tell anybody, God, what a girl. Jesus, she means so much to me. There's nothing like her or him. Has nothing to do with any sort of a tackle giving Valentine's or, it's none of that. But do you hear me? That the more important a God is, the more powerful, the more complex, the proof would be that the more and more, the closer you got to being all-powerful, to being complex to the maximum, the proof would be that he doesn't even have to exist. Verbally, obviously this is striking some of you tonight as being pretty tricky, and it's not. It's just right in front of your eyes. I've just talked about it in many other ways, and some of you have taken it literally as asphalt when you should have taken it as steam coming from the highway, and some of you have tried to turn then the steam into some kind of fog and to write mystical names on it, and some of you still understandably continue to take a lot of this as being psychological, that is in some way personal to you when it seems that I really hit it, that that is true, and you just take it as being in some way true to you, and in some way it could probably be unraveled in you. It can't be unraveled unless you're going to get into life's own genetic code in its own DNA and unravel it. Of course, thankfully you can't do that. So that sort of thing will make hurricanes and volcanoes look like nothing. You cannot do that. But to see that I have put words on something that is manifest in the central nervous system and at the core of every individual and is at the very heart of everything that seems to be relationships between people and your relationship to you. That is the way you think about you, which is what your relationship is. It's not how you feel about you. It's how you think about you. It's thinking about you as the relationship. That's the systematic part. Because you wouldn't be fat, you wouldn't be ugly unless you could think about it. You'd be whatever you are, but you couldn't think about it. There would be no relationship that you had with you. And the weaker the relationship, that is, the weaker the God, the more simplistic it is, the weaker it is, the less important it is, the more it must be noted. And this is not just the opposite, but I throw it in the rest of the sentence. That which is more complex, that which is more important, literally approaches being non-existent. It verbally makes a little sense. It just seems either irrelevant, impossible, dumbfounding. But it literally, the more important, the more complex it becomes, the closer it approaches to literally being non-existent.